Emma was the kind of woman who lived in quiet routines. Every morning she woke up before the sun, made breakfast for her husband, David, and packed a small lunch for their daughter, Lily, before school. She worked at the local library surrounded by shelves of books, their silence both comforting and heavy. On the outside, her life looked steady, almost perfect, a little house, a kind husband, a sweet child. But deep inside, Emma sometimes felt like she was drifting. Something was missing, though she couldn't explain what. It wasn't love for her family. She loved them deeply. It was something within herself, a spark she hadn't felt in years. One Saturday afternoon, when rain fell against the windows and the streets smelled of wet leaves, Emma and David went to a neighborhood gathering. It was the kind of event she usually enjoyed, chatting politely with neighbors, watching Lily play with other children. But that day would be different, though she didn't know it yet. That day she would meet someone who would stir emotions she had buried long ago. The gathering was lively, with soft music playing and neighbors sharing food around a long table. Emma carried a plate of pie into the living room when David's voice called from behind her. "Emma, come here, I want you to meet someone." She turned, balancing the plate in her hands, and her eyes landed on a tall man standing beside her husband. His smile was easy, his posture relaxed, and his eyes deep, steady, and somehow familiar met hers. "Emma," David said cheerfully, "this is Ryan. We grew up together. He just moved back after years away." Ryan extended his hand. "It's good to finally meet you. David's told me all about his wonderful wife." Emma laughed softly, shaking his hand. "Hopefully only the good things. Only the best." Ryan replied with a grin that seemed to carry more warmth than the words themselves. The conversation was casual at first. What brought him back, how the town had changed over the years. Ryan had lived in different cities, worked in places Emma only read about in books. He spoke with energy, like a man who had seen the world and carried pieces of it within him. And as he talked, Emma found herself listening too closely, noticing the way his voice carried a calm strength, the way his eyes held a quiet mystery. She didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it was only polite conversation. But when Ryan laughed at one of her small jokes, something inside her shifted, something she hadn't felt in years. It was not attraction, not love, but a spark of curiosity, an awakening of a part of her she thought had gone silent. As the evening continued, Emma tried to focus on the gathering. She chatted with neighbors, checked on Lily, and made sure David had what he needed. But every now and then, her eyes wandered across the room, almost unconsciously. And there he was, Ryan, talking with someone else, smiling, listening, carrying himself with ease. And once, just once, their eyes met across the room. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but it was enough to make her chest tighten. Emma quickly looked away, scolding herself silently. What was she doing? She loved her husband, she loved her family, and she was only being friendly. That was all. But the truth was, that single glance carried something unspoken, something she couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. Later that evening, as the rain slowed and the guests began to leave, Emma stood by the doorway with Lily's hand in hers. Ryan approached, saying goodbye. His smile was warm, his words kind. "It was really nice to meet you, Emma. I'm sure we'll see each other again." She returned the smile politely. "Yes, I'm sure we will." And then he was gone. Stepping out into the night air, Emma didn't know why, but as she watched him leave, a quiet thought crossed her mind. Why did my heart skip when he smiled? On the way home, David drove while Lily dozed in the back seat. The windshield wipers brushed away the last of the rain. Emma stared out the window at the blurred streetlights, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She told herself it was nothing, a friendly meeting, a new face in town, a harmless introduction. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't nothing. Something had stirred within her, and it was still there, humming quietly beneath the surface. That night, when she lay in bed beside David, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, Emma closed her eyes and tried to fall asleep. But instead of rest, her mind replayed Ryan's voice, his stories, his easy laugh. She didn't want to think about him, yet she couldn't stop. It was as if her heart had opened a door she didn't know existed. And behind that door was something unknown. Waiting. Emma turned to her side, pulling the blanket close. She told herself that tomorrow would be different, that the feeling would fade, that life would go back to its steady rhythm. But in her chest, she knew the truth. One glance had changed something inside her. And even if she didn't yet understand what it meant, she could already sense if this was only the beginning. The weeks after the neighborhood gathering felt strangely different for Emma. Life carried on as usual early mornings. Library work, school runs, dinners with David, but beneath all of it, a quiet current of change flowed. Ryan was back in town, and somehow his presence lingered in her thoughts even when he wasn't around. She didn't understand why. It began innocently enough. She ran into him at the grocery store one evening. Lily was tugging at her sleeve, asking for cookies, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Careful, if you give in to that smile, you'll leave with the whole store." She turned, and there was Ryan, holding a basket. He looked casual, but the way his eyes lit up when he saw her made Emma's heart stumble. They laughed, exchanged a few words, and parted ways. But as she drove home, she realized she was smiling for no reason at all. Soon after, Ryan started appearing more often. Sometimes he was with David, helping with small projects around the house. Other times Emma saw him walking past the park or stopping by the library to say hello. Each time their conversations grew a little longer, little warmer, weaving small threads of connection that Emma couldn't ignore. One evening, David invited Ryan over for dinner. The three of them sat at the table, Lily laughing as Ryan told funny stories about his travels. Emma watched the way Ryan spoke, confident yet thoughtful, carrying pieces of a world she had never known. His stories filled the room with energy, and Emma found herself drawn in completely, her eyes lingering longer than they should. After dinner, David excused himself to the garage to fix a loose shelf. Ryan stayed behind in the kitchen, helping Emma clear the plates. The room grew quiet, the clinking of dishes the only sound. Then Ryan spoke, his voice low but steady. "Emma, can I ask you something?" She glanced at him, unsure. "Of course." He leaned against the counter, his eyes holding hers. "Do you ever feel like life has more to offer, but you're not sure how to reach it?" The words hit her like a wave. It was as if he had spoken the very thoughts she carried silently for years. She wanted to answer honestly, to tell him how often she wondered about the pieces of herself she had set aside, the dreams she once had, the longing she couldn't explain. But instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes." Ryan didn't push further. He simply nodded, his expression soft, almost knowing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy with meaning, filled with something neither of them dared to name. That night, lying in bed beside David, Emma couldn't forget the way Ryan had looked at her. It wasn't bold, it wasn't demanding, but it carried a weight she couldn't shake. She replayed his words in her head over and over. "Do you ever feel like life has more to offer?" For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not just as a wife, not just as a mother, not just as someone keeping routines alive, but as a woman with hidden longings and unspoken dreams. And that realization unsettled her. Days turned into weeks, and the secret inside her began to grow. It wasn't a secret she could confess to anyone, not to David, not even to herself fully. It wasn't about actions, it was about feelings, and feelings were harder to silence. Every time Ryan's name came up casually in conversation, Emma's heart quickened. Every time David mentioned spending time with him, she felt both relief and guilt. Relief, because Ryan was still close. Guilt, because she cared too much. One afternoon, Emma was at the library sorting returned books when she noticed Ryan standing by the entrance. He held a book in his hand and smiled as he walked over. "I thought you could recommend something worth reading," he said lightly. She laughed nervously. "You came to the right place." They spent half an hour walking through the aisles, talking quietly about books, about travel, about small things that somehow felt bigger when spoken aloud. When he finally checked out a novel, he said, "I'll let you know what I think. Maybe we can talk about it over coffee sometime." Emma froze for a second. It sounded casual, friendly, but beneath the surface, the invitation felt like more. She nodded slowly. Sure. When he left, Emma leaned against the counter, her chest tight. She knew she should draw a line, but instead, she found herself waiting for the next time. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, Emma caught her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who was still a wife, still a mother, but also someone standing at the edge of something unknown. The thought scared her, but it also made her feel alive. Secrets have a way of slipping quietly into ordinary days. And Emma now carried one. Not because of anything she had done, but because of the feeling she held inside, locked away where no one could see. The next morning, David mentioned Ryan casually while sipping his coffee. He's been a great help lately. It feels like having a brother around again. Emma forced a smile. That's nice, but inside, her heart whispered the truth she couldn't admit. Ryan wasn't just David's friend anymore. To her, he had become something else's secret she was carrying alone. A spark she couldn't put out, no matter how hard she tried. And as she walked out the door to start her day, she knew one thing for certain. The smile she now wore around Ryan wasn't just friendly. It was the beginning of something deeper, something she couldn't yet name. But something that had already begun. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves painting the town in shades of gold and red. Emma walked quickly down the street, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She had told herself this meeting was harmless, just coffee with a friend. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. Ryan was already there when she arrived at the small cafe tucked away on the corner. He sat by the window, a book resting on the table beside his coffee. When he looked up and saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart stumble. "Emma," he said warmly, standing as she approached. "I'm glad you came." She slid into the seat across from him, her hands slightly trembling as she held her cup. "Of course," she replied softly, though she knew she had almost convinced herself not to. At first, the conversation was light. They talked about the book he had borrowed from the library, about Lily's school play, about small things that didn't matter but kept their voices steady. Yet beneath every word was something unspoken, a current pulling them closer. Time slipped away unnoticed. The cafe emptied as the afternoon wore on, but Emma and Ryan kept talking. Their laughter mixed with moments of silence, and in those quiet pauses, Emma felt her heart racing. She couldn't explain why being with him felt different. Why his presence awakened something inside her she thought she had lost. Then it happened. As she reached for her cup, her fingers brushed against his hand resting on the table. It was the lightest touch, barely there, but it sent a rush of warmth through her body. She froze, her eyes lifting to meet his. Ryan didn't move his hand. He didn't speak. And for a brief moment, the world outside disappeared. Emma pulled her hand back slowly, her breath caught in her chest. She forced a smile, trying to steady her voice. "We should probably get going." Ryan nodded, though his eyes lingered on hers longer than they should have. "You're right. But I'm glad we did this." As Emma walked home, the weight of what had happened pressed against her. It was only a touch, nothing more. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. Because that touch had awakened a longing she could no longer deny. That evening, as she set the table for dinner, Emma moved carefully, as if afraid David would see the secret she carried. He was cheerful, talking about work, asking about Lily's day, smiling the way he always did. And Emma answered, smiled back, laughed when she was supposed to. But all the while a storm brewed quietly inside her when she lay in bed that night. Staring at the ceiling, her heart was restless. She loved David. She had built a life with him, shared dreams, raised a child. But something had shifted. She now carried two truths, her love for her husband and the new, dangerous longing she felt for Ryan. Days passed, but the memory of that cafe stayed with her. She remembered the sound of Ryan's laugh, the way he had listened, the moment their hands touched. She told herself to forget it, to push it away. But the harder she tried, the stronger it became. One afternoon, Emma found herself walking by the park. Children played on the swings, their laughter echoing in the cool air. She spotted Ryan sitting on a bench, watching the leaves fall. She hadn't planned to see him, but her feet carried her toward him anyway. He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Emma," he said softly. She sat down beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Sometimes I come here to think," he admitted. "Life feels quieter under the trees." They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play, listening to the wind rustle through the branches. Then Ryan turned to her, his voice low. "Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something? Like you want to step forward, but you're afraid of what comes after?" Emma's heart tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. She swallowed hard, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, more than I'd like to admit." Their eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. They both knew what they were feeling, even if they couldn't say it out loud. Emma stood quickly, breaking the spell. "I should go," she said, her voice unsteady. Ryan nodded, though his eyes followed her with quiet intensity. "Take care, Emma." As she walked away, her steps hurried. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't know what scared her more, the longing itself, or the fact that she didn't want it to stop. That night, she sat alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. The house was silent, but her heart was loud. She poured herself a cup of tea and stared at the steam rising from the cup. Her thoughts tangled. She told herself she hadn't done anything wrong. A coffee, a conversation, a fleeting touch, nothing more. But she knew the truth. It wasn't about what she had done. It was about what she felt. And feelings once ignited were harder to hide than actions. Emma rested her head in her hands, whispering to herself, "What am I doing?" But no answer came, only the quiet thrum of her own heartbeat. Heavy with secrets she couldn't share. For the first time, she admitted she was caught between two worlds. The safe, steady life she had built with David, and the dangerous, thrilling pull she felt toward Ryan. And the more she tried to resist, the deeper she sank into the longing. Emma knew she was walking on dangerous ground. But she also knew one thing with certainty. She didn't want to stop. Winter arrived early, covering the town in frost and quiet. Emma wrapped herself in her coat as she walked home from the library, her breath rising like smoke in the cold air. She tried to focus on the beauty of the season, the twinkling lights, the sound of children laughing in the snow, but her mind kept drifting back to Ryan. No matter how hard she tried, it was always there. His words, his smile, the touch of his hand. At dinner one evening, David spoke casually while cutting his food. "Ryan's been helping me with some projects. He's handy, and it's good having him around. It feels like he never left." Emma forced a smile. "That's nice," she said quietly, her heart tightening. David had no idea how much those words cut through her. Ryan wasn't just around. He had become part of her thoughts, her secret, her quiet storm. That night, after David and Lily had gone to bed, Emma sat by the window, staring at the falling snow. She realized she could no longer keep this inside. The secret was too heavy. The feelings she carried weren't fading, they were growing. And they were pulling her further away from the life she had built. The next morning, without planning it, Emma found herself walking to Ryan's house. She didn't rehearse what she would say. Her hands shook as she knocked on the door. When it opened, Ryan stood there, surprised, his hair slightly tousled, his expression softening the moment he saw her. "Emma," he said, his voice low. "What's wrong?" She stepped inside, her heart pounding. The warmth of his house wrapped around her, but she felt anything but comfortable. She looked at him, her eyes full of conflict. "I can't keep this inside anymore," she whispered. Ryan frowned gently. "Inside? What do you mean?" Her voice trembled, but the words spilled out. "These feelings. I don't know what to do with them. They confuse me, they scare me, but they're real. And I can't pretend anymore." For a moment, the room was silent. Ryan's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, though not too close. "Emma, I never meant to cause you pain. I never wanted this to be a burden. He paused, searching for words. "I only wanted you to remember you're alive inside. I see something in you, something you've hidden away. And maybe I reminded you of it. But I never wanted to hurt you. Her chest ached. "But you did remind me," she said, tears threatening. "You reminded me of a part of myself I thought was gone, and now I don't know how to live with it." Ryan looked at her with quiet intensity. "You don't have to make any decisions today. Just be honest with yourself. What do you truly want, Emma? Safety or the unknown? The answer has to come from you, not from me." She turned away, staring at the floor. Her heart was in pieces. She loved David. She loved her daughter. But the truth was undeniable. Ryan had awakened something in her she couldn't put back to sleep. The weight of her longing was too heavy to ignore. She left his house without another word, walking quickly through the snow. The cold air burned her lungs, but she barely felt it. Her mind was louder than the wind, louder than the crunch of her boots. She was torn between two lives, the steady one she had built with David, and the dangerous, uncertain one that Ryan represented at home. Lily greeted her with a hug, her little arms wrapping tightly around her waist. Emma clung to her daughter, her heart breaking. How could she risk losing this? How could she risk hurting David, who trusted her completely? Yet how could she ignore the truth of what she felt? That night, Emma lay awake while David slept peacefully beside her. She stared at the ceiling, her heart restless, her mind racing. The silence pressed against her, and she realized something painful. There was no simple answer. No matter what she chose, someone would be hurt. The following days were heavy with tension, though David noticed nothing. Emma moved through routines, cooked meals, read bedtime stories, went to work, but inside, she carried a storm. She avoided Ryan, yet his absence made her long for him even more. One evening, while walking home from the library, Emma stopped by the frozen lake near the park. The air was sharp, her breath forming clouds. She stared at the icy surface, her reflection faint in the moonlight. In that moment, she whispered to herself, "You have to choose." Her heart knew it couldn't live in two places at once. She either had to step back into the life she had built and protect it fiercely, or she had to let go and risk everything for the unknown. Both choices carried love. Both carried pain. A few days later, Emma returned to Ryan's door. He opened it, his expression unreadable. She looked at him, her eyes filled with the weight of her decision. "I don't know where this will end," she said softly, "but I know I can't erase what I feel. I had to tell you the truth." Ryan nodded, his voice calm. "And now you have to decide what to do with it." Emma's heart trembled. She didn't step forward, she didn't step back. She simply stood there, caught between two lives, two loves, two truths. The story didn't end with an answer, 'cause sometimes life itself doesn't. Some choices take longer than a moment to make. But one thing was certain: Emma's desires, once ignited, could never be forgotten. The snow kept falling, the night kept moving, and Emma stood in the doorway of a life that had changed forever.